There exists a profound hypothesis, one that has been scarcely examined with the intellectual rigor it warrants, nor spoken of with the gravitas its immense scope demands. Yet, should its staggering implications prove accurate, it would not merely tremor the long-held pillars of our historical understanding, but utterly demolish and then painstakingly reforge the very lens through which we comprehend the vast, intricate tapestry of human history, as it has been so meticulously compiled and narrated across generations. The woman at the heart of this theory, seemingly destined to be swallowed by the hushed anonymity of time's relentless march, veiled by forgotten ages and obscured by the passage of millennia, may well have been the world's inaugural living data center. She was, in essence, an organic, breathing archive, a sentient repository for a monumental faith poised precariously on the very precipice of its genesis. This was no mere poetic flourish, no vague, ethereal symbol concocted for distant veneration or abstract admiration. On the contrary, her role was one of startling, undeniable, and utterly urgent practicality. It was a mission of critical, existential importance. And if this radical theory truly holds sway, then the years of her life that now appear as blank pages in the annals of memory, those unchronicled decades of her existence, were far from the placid, uneventful stretches we so often and so carelessly assume them to be. Instead, they simmered with an intense, burning purpose, each day laden with an almost unbearable burden of responsibility, a silent, weighty mandate. To truly grasp the magnitude of this, we must cast a sharper, more focused gaze upon the primitive context of that nascent era. A fledgling community had just come into being, fragile as a tender seedling, pushing its first tentative shoot through unforgiving, barren soil. It lacked every foundational pillar we now take for granted, every sophisticated support system that underpins modern societies. There were no comprehensive, professional record-keeping systems, no standardized, unified documents to ensure consistency, no technological means of storage whatsoever beyond the inherently fallible and fleeting capacity of the human mind. Every single piece of crucial information, from the very first divine teachings and miraculous acts to the foundational narratives of its origin, the intimate stories of its nascent days, rested entirely upon the precarious, fragile scaffolding of individual memory, upon the often shifting recollections of individual people. And within that turbulent, chaotic, and risk-laden landscape, a stage set for profound vulnerability, there stood but one solitary woman. She, and she alone, held the complete, unbroken record of the before everything began, the pristine, unadulterated essence of a burgeoning faith's primordial moments, its deepest, unwritten truths. One sole individual possessed the knowledge of what transpired before the dazzling public spotlight illuminated the movement, before the miracles witnessed by thousands, before fervent crowds gathered to hang on every word. She was the silent keeper of intimate secrets, private conversations, mundane daily occurrences, the initial instructions, those fundamental, unhewn bricks that formed the very bedrock of an entirely new worldview, a nascent civilization in miniature. These were not merely scattered fragments of anecdotal recall, not just charming stories told around a fire. These were the bedrock, the very roots, the most primal and undefiled nature of everything that would later unfold. They were the genetic code of a movement, intact and uncorrupted. And what makes this revelation even more arresting, truly groundbreaking in its implications, is this: that supremely vital foundation was not immutably etched into eternal books designed to last millennia, nor was it chiseled in imperishable stone, proof against the ravages of time. It resided, instead, within a flesh and blood human being, a mortal organism aging with each passing day and hour, subject to the relentless, unavoidable attrition of time, disease, and the inevitable decay of memory itself. This, precisely, is the pivotal point that elevates this entire narrative, making it infinitely more tense, dramatic, and profoundly meaningful than anything we have ever conceived or been taught within the sanitized versions of history. Because when a community, a great movement, a nascent spiritual awakening, depends entirely on the memory of a single individual for its very existence, its core identity. Each passing year is not merely a continuation of time's flow. Every single moment carries an invisible, crushing weight of pressure, a lurking dread that threatens to consume all, to erase the very genesis of their shared reality. What catastrophic fate would befall that living repository of memory, that irreplaceable spring of pure, unfiltered information, if it were to suddenly vanish, dissolving into oblivion through illness, accident, or the natural process of aging? What would become of the faith's very soul, its foundational integrity, if its memory keeper, its living archive, its singular source of truth were no longer present? No one dared to voice that terrifying question aloud. No one wished to confront such a horrifying, utterly destabilizing prospect. Yet, every soul within that tender, burgeoning community implicitly understood, instinctively felt, the immense, almost crushing burden weighing down upon that one woman. It was a collective anxiety, a shared, silent prayer for her continued existence. And it was this unspoken, profound awareness that rendered every day of her life more crucial than ever before. Every single breath she took, carrying a vital significance for the very survival, the very possibility of a nascent faith. Not because she performed grand deeds on the battlefield or achieved glorious feats visible to all, recorded for posterity, but simply because she times was there. She existed. As long as she lived, as long as she remained present, steadfast in her being, an essential fragment of the original truth, an invisible yet unyielding link to the very source, was preserved, intact and uncorrupted. Her presence was the firewall against erasure. But our reflection need not, and indeed should not, end here. There is another perspective, even more profound, one that compels us to pause and contemplate, to truly allow our minds to linger much longer, to walk in her shoes for a moment. If she was the sole guardian and protector of that invaluable treasury of memory, the unwritten sacred texts, then she was also the one who had to live with it, confront it daily, and carry the immense, perpetual weight of those memories every single day, every hour, every solitary second of her existence. There was no respite. There was no escape. There was no way to simply turn off the incessant flow of images, words, and emotions from the past, to put the archive to sleep. Every minute detail, every vivid image, every pivotal moment, the genesis of the faith itself, they replayed endlessly within her mind, like an unending, looping film reel. Sometimes, perhaps, they were a source of solace, a wellspring of quiet joy. But just as often, they must have been an unceasing, oppressive burden, a constant mental and emotional torrent. And here, a uniquely human, profoundly tragic paradox begins to starkly reveal itself, cutting to the very core of individual existence. That which allowed an entire sprawling community to exist, to take root, and eventually to flourish, to define itself, was also that which silently, relentlessly, and persistently tormented and subjected a lone individual to an unimaginable, lifelong endurance. Her strength was their foundation, her suffering their salvation. This transcends being merely a historical account of religion or the origins of a belief system. This is a deeply poignant narrative about the extraordinary resilience of a human being, about the profound, almost cosmic loneliness inherent in bearing such an immense, solitary responsibility, a burden that few, if any, could ever truly comprehend. And if we delve even deeper, stripping away layers of assumption, we uncover something even more remarkable, even more haunting about her journey. Throughout those long, arduous years, while she remained the quiet anchor, the world around her underwent relentless, dizzying transformations. Those who once cowered in fear, who once sought to evade persecution, began to rise, becoming resolute leaders, confident in their new convictions. Those who once opposed the burgeoning faith, who once scorned its followers, gradually transformed into fervent believers, evangelists for the very cause they once reviled. Distant, obscure cities, once mere footnotes on a map, abruptly became new epicenters of the movement, radiating influence. A tiny group, an initially insignificant, almost invisible movement, steadily blossomed into a formidable force, sweeping across the Mediterranean, shaking the very foundations of the ancient world. But what of her? What was her part in this grand, accelerating drama? She did not move at that dizzying pace. She was not the one undertaking distant missionary journeys, traversing strange lands, and facing unknown perils. She was not the one standing before cheering crowds, delivering eloquent, fire and brimstone sermons that swayed thousands. She stayed. She remained steadfast, quietly, like an ancient, immovable tree whose roots cling deep to the earth, anchoring an entire ecosystem. Her contribution was in her stillness. And it is this seemingly simple, utterly ordinary act of staying, of rooted constancy, that unveils an incredibly difficult question, a profound challenge to our modern, hyperactive way of thinking. In a world that relentlessly celebrates movement, continuous change, boundless expansion, dynamic innovation, and outward achievement, does anyone, how many of us, truly perceive and genuinely appreciate the core, irreplaceable value of standing still, of steadfast stability, and of enduring, unwavering steadfastness? This then becomes a powerful pattern interrupt, a radical disruption of our conventional modes of thought, a jarring pause in our pursuit of constant progress. Because it runs completely counter to the entirety of how we are raised, how we are conditioned to define success, meaning, and worth in life. We are taught that we must constantly advance, expand our influence, grow without cease, always seeking novelty, greater achievements, and outward grandeur. The message is clear: move forward or be left behind. But the story of this silent woman speaks to us of something entirely, refreshingly different. There are times when the most important, the most meaningful, the most existentially critical thing one can do is not to leave, not to abandon, not to give up. It is simply to continue to be present, to continue to stand firm, to continue to be oneself, to be the unwavering anchor in a world in flux, the silent guardian of an essential truth. And viewed through this lens, her role is no longer that of a shadowy secondary figure, someone merely hidden behind the grand, epic unfolding of historical events, a footnote to a greater narrative. She emerges as a silent pillar, an indispensable and unwavering foundation, without which the entire edifice would have crumbled into dust. Not through monumental, earth-shattering actions that rewrite empires or alter the course of battles, but through her sheer, unyielding stability, her unshakable constancy, her immutable, unwavering presence, a quiet yet powerful force, a quality that any family, any community, any movement, any civilization absolutely requires to survive and thrive, yet is so rarely acknowledged, so seldom honored with the recognition and gratitude it truly deserves. It is the uncelebrated bedrock. Yet, there remains a haunting question, unanswered, a question that perhaps you, the reader of these very lines, are now beginning to feel resonate deeply within your own heart, stirring a sense of disquiet. If all of this is true, if her role was indeed so monumentally significant, so utterly pivotal, then why has history remained so profoundly, deafeningly silent about her? Why are there not more detailed accounts, more documents mentioning her with greater clarity, greater reverence? Why was such a fundamentally important figure closed off from the narrative, seemingly forgotten after a mere handful of final, ambiguous mentions? Perhaps two distinct possibilities present themselves, each with its own somber implications. One is that we have irrevocably lost that crucial part of history, that any records pertaining to her were destroyed by the relentless, indifferent currents of time, vanished into the vast ocean of forgotten things. The other is that such a comprehensive account was never truly written down, never fully recorded or acknowledged from the very beginning. It simply wasn't deemed important enough to document. And if it is the second possibility, then that realization is infinitely more thought-provoking, more troubling, and profoundly disheartening. Because it implies not everything of importance, not every core event, is meticulously documented or inscribed for future generations. Not every enduring value, every silent contribution, every act of unwavering steadfastness is preserved within the sacred annals of history. Not every individual who wields immense, transformative influence over the destiny of a collective is sufficiently named, adequately honored, or even remembered. Their impact is felt, but their presence is erased. This, precisely, is where this seemingly ancient tale powerfully directly intersects with the stark, often unacknowledged realities of our modern lives. Because countless individuals in today's world are living lives remarkably similar to hers, embodying her quiet, profound significance. No blinding spotlight illuminates their path. No public recognition, no resounding accolades from the masses, no awards or prestigious titles, no illustrious list of achievements publicly broadcast for all to admire. Yet, they are steadfastly, resiliently holding their families together, sustaining their communities, upholding an ideal, or preserving something profoundly sacred and irreplaceable, preventing it from collapsing, from fading into oblivion, from being lost to the cacophony of modern life. They are the unseen pillars of our world. And perhaps, viewed from this profound angle, the story is no longer a distant academic anecdote from the remote past, confined to dusty scrolls. It becomes strikingly immediate. It feels present, so close, in fact, that it can sometimes be unsettling, prompting us to ponder deeply, to look inward, because it compels each of us to introspect, to ask ourselves the most raw and vulnerable of questions. If no one records my life, if no one ever acknowledges my silent sacrifices, my unwavering presence, my quiet burdens, then do the things I am doing, the responsibilities I am carrying, still hold meaning? Do they still matter? And this is where the narrative reaches its emotional crescendo, where our hearts are touched in the most sincere, unspoken way. Because the answer, though never explicitly stated in words, is subtly scattered, interwoven throughout this entire journey of contemplation, shimmering just beneath the surface. True value does not lie in whether something is recorded or publicly acknowledged by the world. Value resides, intrinsically, in whether that something keeps goodness, keeps what is right, keeps what is essential, alive and flourishing. It is in the act of preservation itself, a memory preserved across generations, ensuring continuity. A faith steadfastly maintained against the storm, providing solace and purpose. A community stabilized, unified from within, fostering belonging. A future generation gifted with something precious to hold on to, a foundation upon which to build their tomorrow, their hopes, their dreams. These are not boisterous, ostentatious things that demand applause or headlines, but they carry a weight of 1,000 pounds, an invisible gravity that determines survival itself, the very fabric of existence. And viewed in that way, those silent years of her life were not empty voids, not mere absences, not lost time. They were the very core, the quietly beating heart of the entire story, the indispensable foundation upon which everything else was built. The part that, if absent, if lost, if she had faltered, might well have meant that the entire grand narrative that followed, the story we know today, would not exist as we understand it. It would have been erased before it even truly began. And perhaps this is the ultimate thought that compels one to remain until the very end of this chain of contemplation. Because this story is not merely about a woman who lived in the distant past. It is reflecting a question that is profoundly present, acutely urgent, deeply human, echoing through the corridors of our own lives. In a noisy, bustling world that primarily acknowledges grand achievements, dazzling successes, and those who relentlessly move forward, are we, perhaps, overlooking, forgetting, or failing to honor those countless individuals who are quietly, persistently holding everything together around us, preventing it all from crumbling into chaos?